Hello and welcome to Days of Roar, a Detroit Tigers podcast brought to you by the Detroit Free Press. I'm your host, Tigers beat writer Evan Petzold, and this week I am joined by special guest Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for the full show for now the fourth week in a row. Chris, thank you once again for joining me this week.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right, the Tigers, it was a 2-4 record this week on the 6-game homestand at Comerica Park. It was a 1-2 record versus the New York Mets, losing game 1 and 2 in the series, but winning game 3. And then it was a 1-2 record versus the Chicago White Sox, splitting games 1 and 2 before losing game 3. It was some frustrating baseball, no doubt about it, especially against the Mets. You lose games 1 and 2, and that just felt like a dagger right out the gate. And then you have the White Sox come to town. You think, okay, the Tigers will be able to bounce back against the Southsiders. Not so much because they lose game 3. We know that this Tigers team is making the postseason. So I think that's why it's important to introduce a postseason panic meter. Low, medium, high. Where are you at on the panic meter for this team in the postseason? Because we know they're going to get there. But with the way they've been playing recently, where are you at in terms of how far they can actually go?
Well, I'll say it takes a lot for me to panic. There haven't been a whole lot of good signs lately, but this is a personal thing. I'm still like a medium because once you get to the playoffs, anything can happen. We've seen that. But there are a lot of things that are heading in the wrong direction right now. So I don't blame anybody else if they're at a high panic mode, but I'm just trying to play it cool for now.
So you don't blame me for having a high panic meter?
No, not at all.
Because I'm a little bit panicked and I ride the roller coaster a little bit more than most. Maybe I do. Maybe I need to work on being a little bit more steady. But still, when you look at it, since July 9th, the Tigers have a 23-28 record in 51 games. You want to go back even further? Since June 14th, the Tigers had a 36-37 record in 73 games. It's September 8th. So it's been nearly 3 months of the Tigers playing below 500. Since the All-Star break, the Tigers had a 23-24 record in 47 games. No matter how you spin it, unless you look at the entire 2025 season, which if you want to do that, fair, go ahead. You got to play all 162. It just hasn't been good for the Tigers recently. You lost series to the White Sox, Mets, Athletics, Twins, Phillies, Blue Jays, Rangers, Pirates, Mariners, Nationals, all since the beginning of July. So, and then you want to break it down like offense, pitching staff, and kind of evaluate where the team is at there. Go back to July 9th. In this 23-28 stretch, the offense ranks 19th. The pitching staff ranks 24th among 30 MLB teams. To dig deeper into the pitching since July 9th, the rotation ranks 22nd. The bullpen ranks 23rd. All of those ranks sound like a losing team, which is exactly what the Tigers have been since July 9th. The other date that I mentioned was June 14th. That's that 36-37 record for the Tigers in the past 73 games. During that stretch, since June 14th, offense is 12th, rotation is 22nd, bullpen is 21st. That's over the Tigers' last 73 games. And if you want to look at the entire 2025 season, the Tigers have an 82-62 record. They're a good baseball team when you look at 2025 as a whole. It's 11th in offense, 4th in the rotation, and then the big one for me, 24th in the bullpen for the entire 2025 season among the 30 MLB teams. There's just no pitching. And President of Baseball Operations Scott Harris said this team needs to be built on pitching and defense. Pitching is bad. And you have the best pitcher in the world on your roster. That's why I'm concerned. That's why the panic meter is high for me.
Yeah, no, and I think certainly over the last few weeks, what we've seen is a lot of very questionable pitching. And I think that's the biggest reason for concern. But you just touched on the one thing, that is you do have Tarik Skubal. And now that could be, you can't count on him to be perfect at every outing. But if you have the best pitcher on the planet, you have the advantage going into a playoff series. It just, if you've got him going twice or 3 times, he might not win all the games. We saw it last year in Cleveland. He gave up that grand slam. It was not great. And he struggled a little bit relative to his expectations and his track record lately. But that's a guy that you can feel pretty confident that you're going to get a great outing from him in the playoffs. And then beyond that, the other advantage I think you have is you have AJ Hinch. And, there are a lot of great managers out there. I don't think anybody plays the chess match better than AJ Hinch. And the Tigers have this sort of team, particularly on offense, where he can really get you the opposing manager. If they get an advantage, if they get ahead by a couple runs, he really puts the screws to the opposing manager and makes him make tough decisions. The flip side of that is, last year, they were able to do that on the pitching side too, right? They could take advantage of whatever hitters were coming in and use their relievers. And this year, it's just, there's just hardly anybody in the pitching staff to count on outside of Skubal. And so that is a big concern for me. And that would be for those who want to panic or are panicking. I think that's probably the main reason right there is it's just nobody to trust in the pitching staff right now.
Taking a look at the MLB standings with a look at the playoff picture, again, the Tigers have an 82-62 record. First place in the American League Central, 8.5 games ahead of the Kansas City Royals, 9 games ahead of the Cleveland Guardians. Second place in the American League, trailing the AL East leading Toronto Blue Jays by a half game. But the Tigers are still ahead of the AL West leading Houston Astros by 4 games. Right now, the Tigers are lined up for the number 2 seed in the AL with a bye to the ALDS, where they would await the winner of the Houston Astros and the Seattle Mariners. The Mariners scare me because of their pitching. Their starters, Brian Wu, Luis Castillo, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Bryce Miller. The Tigers have Tarik Skubal, and that's pretty much it. I don't see how that holds up in a best of 5 ALDS, which is why my panic meter is high for the Tigers in the postseason, especially if they were to face a team like the Mariners. Now, to your point, the Tigers do have AJ Hinch. The Mariners have Dan Wilson as their manager. I think AJ Hinch would run laps around Dan Wilson as he would most managers across the league. I really respect Kevin Cash for the way that he plays the chess match. Mac Quatraro with the Kansas City Royals, he plays the chess match as well. I think those are probably my top 3 managers in the AL in terms of guys who can play that chess match and can get the most out of their roster, with AJ Hinch leading the way among those 3. I think it's those 3, and then there's a huge gap before you get to number 4, and that's just how good AJ Hinch is. So when you do go into an ALDS series, whether it is the Houston Astros or the Seattle Mariners, you're right. It is advantage Tigers in the managerial category, which goes a long way in the postseason when you're making these early decisions. You got to know when to pull the starting pitcher. You got to know which reliever to go to. You can bring guys off the bench. The Tigers already have the full player buy-in from everyone on their roster, so that definitely helps. But again, when you look at the Mariners and you see their starters, Brian Wu, Luis Castillo, Logan Gilbert, George Kirby, Bryce Miller, I mean, the Tigers have nothing compared to that. You have Tarik Skubal and then just nothing else. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the Tigers having to go up against the Mariners. I don't know what you think.
No, I agree with you there. And the kind of the lasting memory of the Mariners, the last time the Tigers saw them, they were destroying them prior to the All-Star break. And it was Cal Raleigh and Randy Rosarena, and just they were completely outclassed in that series. And who knows what was going on there. That was right when the Tigers hit their worst stretch of the season. But yeah, that's not a team that you necessarily want to face in a short series. To your point, that pitching is really nasty. What's interesting, though, is the Mariners have been kind of muddling along as well. And the Rangers are creeping up. They're only a game and a half behind them. So, I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion that it's the Mariners and Astros. It probably is, but who knows? I mean, there's still a couple weeks left to play in the season. But you can look at any matchup right now and say, well, that doesn't really favor the Tigers the way they're playing. So, yeah, it's going to be tough, but you just got to kind of hold out hope if you're a Tigers fan that something's going to get going right here in the last few weeks, and then they get into the playoffs, and then anything could happen.
You're right. 3 weeks left. A lot can change, not only for these other teams, but also for the Tigers. To your point, they can catch fire here, finish strong, and go into October with a lot of momentum, which is definitely one way to look at it. Another big piece of news this week, Alex Cobb will not pitch for the Tigers in the 2025 season. He signed a 1-year, $15 million contract in free agency. He made, I believe, 10 rehab outings between High A West Michigan and AAA Toledo during 4 separate rehab assignments. He's going to undergo right hip surgery soon. He isn't ready to retire, but he realizes that's probably going to happen. I feel bad for the guy, and I wish him the best. He talked about golfing, hiking with his family, walking without pain, being a dad. Like, those are all things that he looks forward to after getting this right hip surgery. And it just makes you realize what this guy actually went through. Like, for him to not be able to golf, for him to not be able to go on a hike with his family, for him to not be able to like just walk like a normal human being without pain, to feel like you can't be the best version of yourself as a dad because of the pain that you're in, like that tells you exactly what Alex Cobb was going through. And he talked about it. He signed with the Tigers. He was healthy. He passed his physical. And then right before spring training, as he was building up, he had this right hip injury that really flared up on him. It was arthritis, and he was never able to come back from it. He tried to come back. He had injection after injection after injection. I mean, he was dedicated to trying to come back. He was pitching in immense pain, still tried to make it back because he just wanted to contribute to the Tigers. And at the same time, he just wanted to pitch in the big leagues one last time. Those were his goals. He wasn't able to make it back. So you can say it was a bad signing because it was a bad signing. But at the same time, I'm like, a human level, you just feel bad for Alex Cobb, and you really do wish him the best. Like, I really look forward to talking to Alex Cobb at some point down the road, seeing him after the hip surgery, asking him about his golf game, his hikes with his family, being a dad. Like, I'm excited to see him on the other side of his baseball career, considering the way things have went. It's tough for him. It's tough for the Tigers, obviously, because it was a signing gone wrong. But you just hope that this guy can get healthy. He can lead a normal life and all can be well for him as he kind of goes off into the sunset of a really nice big league career.
Yeah, I happened to come down there on Saturday night, which I haven't been able to get down to the stadium as much this year as I'd like to. And I shuffled into the press room right as he was giving his statement. And you could hear the disappointment in his voice. And you also hear there's a certain way that veterans talk to the media, right? They understand your job and they understand what you could tell he wanted fans to understand how much he tried. And AJ Hinch came in and talked about how much he was trying to convince Alex Cobb that he still was contributing to the team, even though he wasn't pitching. And obviously for a competitor, a professional athlete, you don't like to hear that you're like a cheerleader, essentially, or imparting veteran wisdom. But yeah, there's a guy that you understood the reasoning behind the signing. It made some sense. It did not work out. Sometimes that happens with pitchers. You don't usually think it's going to be the hip. But as you said, and I gave a whole long diatribe in person about my dad had a hip resurfacing. He had a double hip resurfacing. And I'll cut all the bits out of that and just say that he did eventually get back to his previous lifestyle where he was able to run again and things like that. And so I'm not worried for Alex Cobb and his future in terms of being able to go out and do the things that he wants to do, spend time with his family, golf, all those things, which is good. But I'm pretty skeptical that he'll be able to come back and be a professional athlete, which is unfortunate. But, he gave it a go. And I watched all those rehab appearances and you could just tell the pain that he was in. He could barely move. And it was unfortunate.
All right, let's get into the big two. Question one of the big two. Kyle Finnegan, Detroit Tigers right-handed reliever, acquired at the trade deadline from the Washington Nationals to the 15-day injured list with a right adductor strain. What is this bullpen going to look like without him? And how concerned are we that this may stretch out a little bit longer than just the minimum 15 days? To go back to when this happened, Kyle Finnegan warming up in the bullpen in the 6th inning of Wednesday's win against the Mets. He threw one pitch and then had to shut it down. It's a groin injury. More specifically, it's a right adductor strain. He hopes to be back for a few games in the regular season. And he knows his body better than anyone, but that timeline worries me. When he says, I'm going to be back for a few games in the regular season, as opposed to I'll be back for the last week. No worries at all. Maybe back in the last few games, maybe for that last series against the Boston Red Sox to finish the regular season. That worries me. And can you imagine if this guy can't get healthy in time to be on the ALDS roster? I ultimately think he's going to get back. I do. I think Kyle Finnegan will get healthy. But I also wonder then, how effective is he going to be, especially if he speeds up his recovery process to get back in time for the playoffs? Does he compensate elsewhere for this adductor strain, for this groin injury, right? Even subconsciously, he might not even be thinking about it, but does he do something differently in his mechanics so there is no pain, and then that impacts his throwing mechanics, and maybe his command isn't as sharp. Maybe the movement on his splitter isn't as sharp, or maybe he's putting additional pressure on his elbow or his shoulder, and there could be another injury down the road. Those are some of the concerns when it does come to trying to rush back by a certain time. So if the goal is to get back for the ALDS, again, fingers crossed that he knows his body better than anyone. He's going to be able to get back before the end of the regular season. I just really hope that he doesn't push it too hard. But then there's the element of you need him. You need him because if you don't have him in the ALDS, your bullpen's toast. So it's a huge blow to the Tigers bullpen. Hopefully he's back sooner rather than later. But for now, it's going to be Will Vest, Tommy Kahnle, Rafael Montero in these high leverage situations, with Will Vest getting most of these save situations. I'm not very confident in that. And Kyle Finnegan's usage as well. The Tigers were using him a ton. His 14 1/3 innings in August, it was the most that he pitched in any month of his 6-year MLB career. So you wonder, did the Tigers break their shiny new toy in month one? And now you're looking at it and it's you got any confidence in Tommy Kahnle and Rafael Montero? I think we know what to expect from Will Vest, but if Will Vest becomes your primary guy in safe situations, now you're looking to Tommy Kahnle and Rafael Montero for some pretty big innings, and they're going to have to take him down, not only for this week, but into next week and maybe into the last week of the regular season as well. And you just hope that you can get Kyle Finnegan back by the ALDS.
Yeah, the people were really kind of counting their blessings that they got Kyle Finnegan at the deadline. I was at least Finnegan's here. And then, of course, he gets hurt. And so, yeah, it throws everything up in the air. To your point, that they've already put Tommy Kahnle back in some high leverage situations. He got out of it in one against the Mets, and he couldn't get out of it against the White Sox. And it's still a little bit iffy when you watch him out there, but he's going to have to pitch in those situations. They can go with Tyler Holton theoretically, but he's been up and down this year. Troy Melton, you thought maybe would go into that role, and then he had a very odd outing in which he walked 4 batters. He hasn't walked more than one time in his entire professional career. He walked 5 once in the minors, and then nothing more than 3, and then randomly walked 4 in the bullpen. So that's a little bit iffy. They haven't really put Montero in any high leverage situations by choice. They've done it a couple times because he was basically the last man standing out there. So I think what you're looking at, I think actually is Paul Sewald coming in and immediately taking on a high leverage role. He just made his second rehab outing with the Whitecaps. Looked pretty good. 18 pitches, 14 strikes. He did give up a hit, but he struck out the other 3 batters. Now it's high A, so it's not big league hitters, but his velocity's around where it always has been, which is 90 to 92. With him, it's not about velocity so much. It's about the arm angle and kind of the shape of the pitch. And his sweeper looks good. So I think he's going to come right in. I think Wednesday is he's eligible to come back off the IL. I think he's going to step into a pretty high leverage role almost immediately. But again, that's a big question mark because it's just this 2 outings in high A.
Yeah, I think we're going to need to see Paul Sewald at least at the AAA level before he gets back to the big leagues. But who knows? I mean, the Tigers obviously have a pressing need right now. And with Paul Sewald able to come back Wednesday, September 10th, that's when he's eligible to return and join the Tigers. We could see him come back from that right shoulder strain. And that sweeper does miss a ton of bats. So that is a guy who, when he's locked in, he can be really effective. As for the guys who are there now, though, I mean, Tommy Kahnle, it's a 4.80 ERA in 57 games. And you mentioned him kind of climbing his way back into these high leverage situations. He recently had a stretch of 7 scoreless innings in a row, and that was snapped in Sunday's loss to the White Sox. But even during the scoreless stretch, it was 7 innings, but he had 3 walks. Don't love that. Rafael Montero, he has a 4.56 ERA in 51 games. Since the Tigers acquired him from the Atlanta Braves at the trade deadline, he has a 2.40 ERA across 15 innings. So Rafael Montero in a Tigers uniform, 2.40 ERA in 15 innings. That sounds really good. But during that stretch, it's 10 walks in 12 strikeouts. I don't like that. So no, I'm not confident in Tommy Kahnle. I'm not confident in Rafael Montero. I'm especially not confident in Montero. Like, to me, Rafael Montero is like shaking a 2-liter of pop and then like slowly twisting off the cap. And at some point it's going to explode and it's just going to get really messy everywhere. Like, that's how I expect the Rafael Montero experience to unfold here. Maybe as soon as this week, but definitely in the coming weeks. I just don't see that going well because he's walking too many batters. And again, like it's 10 walks, 12 strikeouts, and 15 innings as a Tiger. Like, that's not great. That's just not great. I know the 2.40 ERA, it sounds sexy, but you look under the hood and it's not great. So going back to Kyle Finnegan, it's probably the 3rd biggest injury news of the season behind Jackson Jobe's Tommy John surgery, Reese Olson being ruled out for the regular season, maybe Parker Meadows, Matt Vierling, those guys getting hurt in spring training. But for injuries during the season, Jackson Jobe, Reese Olson, and then Kyle Finnegan, you just really hope that Finnegan is right when he says that he expects to be back for a few games to end the regular season. The placement on the injured list is retroactive to September 1st. So he is eligible to return September 16th, but it just sounds like he's going to need more time than that. The question then becomes, how much more time does he need?
Yeah, I think he said that he could keep the arm strength up, right? Because it's a lower body injury, but pitching is a whole operation, right? You need to use your legs. You can't just sit in the hot tub and kind of throw the ball and, maybe keep your arm strength up, but you're not going to have your mechanics down. So, and you have to be really careful because you don't want to tweak that and make it worse and then be out for the playoffs. So it's going to be they're going to have to thread this needle. It wouldn't shock me if he actually doesn't come back and pitch in any regular season games. Maybe he goes out and throws a couple bullpens or does some live BP or something like that, but actually doesn't get back into the game. I'm sure they'd love him to, but I think, above all, they want to target to make sure he's available for the playoffs. And if they need to give him an extra day of rest or a couple extra days of rest versus getting him into game action, I think they'd probably go that route. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot riding on him coming back and being healthy because we've seen the bullpen it's just been taxed. And this goes back to the whole, why they call it a pitching staff, right? With the starting rotation, aside from Skubal, not getting anything, not working deep into games regularly, relievers are being asked to cover more innings and being asked to do jobs that maybe they're not suited for. And it causes a whole chain reaction. And, I don't know what's going to fix one or the other. Finnegan coming back would help. It pushes everybody down an inning or so, but I really think ultimately that they're going to have to figure out the starting rotation, and I don't know if they can.
Question 2 of the big 2. Gleyber Torres is hitting .220 with 24 walks and 37 strikeouts in 44 games since the All-Star game with a .316 on base percentage. Before the All-Star game, he hit .281 with 51 walks and 46 strikeouts in 84 games with a 387 on-base percentage. Now, it's not like Gleyber Torres isn't performing at all, but how badly do the Tigers need the pre-All-Star game version of Gleyber Torres down the stretch, and especially in the postseason?
Yeah, I suggested this topic the other day because he was kind of slumping, and then he went out and hit a 3-run homer on Saturday night that kind of iced the game against the White Sox. But it's still an 88 WRC plus in the second half, 12% below average. He was 130 in the first half. And obviously, you'd rather have the 130 guy. And I don't know if there's anything you could really point to. The strikeout rate has gone up from 12% to about 19% in the second half. 19% is still fine, but it's not what he was doing before, right? And that leads to some issues. There's also an element of bad luck. His batting average on balls in play is below 250. So you hope that some of that evens out, but they really need him back because he was their most consistent performer. And this lineup is filled with guys who are pretty streaky. Riley Green is the key example of that, a guy who can actually go bonkers for a month and then not hit anything for 3 weeks. But you see that from Torkelson. You see it from Colt Keith a little bit. Winslow Perez has been pretty consistent lately, but I don't know if you can really count on that. Kerry Carpenter's been up and down. So Torres was just kind of that steadying force. And you'd really like him to be steady 130 instead of an 88. So I don't know. I think I still view him as kind of their best performer, the best option when with men in scoring position. It seems like he usually comes through in that situation. People don't do it every time, but yeah, they're going to need him to pick it up a little bit down the stretch if they want to go anywhere in the playoffs, I think.
I think maybe part of it is just trying to do a little bit too much and carry the load for this team as they've lost a handful of games recently. We just talked about it at the top of the show, where they've been since roughly around the middle of July. Well, what happens in the middle of July? That's the All-Star game. Where have the Tigers been since then? Well, they've lost more games than they've won. So maybe Gleyber Torres trying to do a little bit too much. I look at the on-base percentage. Before the All-Star game, Gleyber Torres had a 387 OBP. That ranks 6th in MLB. After the All-Star game, Gleyber Torres has a 316 OBP. That ranks 103rd in MLB. So that's like going from the 97th percentile to like the 65th percentile in on-base percentage. That's a pretty big difference when you talk about just how elite he was at getting on base. And you read my mind with what he does offensively. Like, he is the steady in the Tigers offense. Riley Green might be the heartbeat that makes everything click. And Spencer Torkelson and Kerry Carpenter, those guys might be the 1-2 punch in that power department. But Gleyber Torres is the steady. He is the guy that you expect to get on base all the time. And you have to get on base to score runs. And since the All-Star break, Gleyber Torres hasn't been getting on base as often. Now, he's still a good player. I'm not trying to rip on Gleyber Torres. Great signing, 1 year, $15 million, certainly better than Alex Cobb. But we've seen Gleyber Torres at his best, and we're just not seeing him at his best right now. I think that needs to change in the next 3 weeks, because if I'm the Tigers, I would be a little bit worried going into the postseason without the best version of Gleyber Torres at the top of the lineup. Because to your point, we know how hot and cold Riley Green can be. We know how Spencer Torkelson can go through his slumps, though not so much this season. We definitely know how Kerry Carpenter can go through a bad stretch. We've seen all those things over and over and over again. The one thing that has kept the Tigers afloat during all those times, it's Gleyber Torres. So the Tigers are going to need the good version of him. I'm not worried about Gleyber Torres. I think he's a good player. I think he's going to put up a good plate appearance. He's shown us that he can do that throughout the entire season. But it's September, and it's September 8th. The All-Star game was in mid-July. So I think it's time to get this thing rolling before October comes around.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what you can hold out hope for is that it's a long season, and he's just maybe trying to pace himself a little bit. Obviously, you want to go out there and perform whatever you can. But he feels like a guy who's probably going to lock in really well in the playoffs. He's certainly been there plenty of times. At least that's what you hope for. And to your point, like, the on-base percentage is everything with him, because the difference between him being on base 38% of the time and 32% of the time is probably, 5 or 6 runs Riley Green hits, Spencer Torkelson hits that he's suddenly not on base, and that's just a hit and the inning ends. So needs to get back to that working counts, and I think he probably will. But yeah, I mean, he's going to need to. We'll say that.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we return, we're joined by Nick Pollack of Pitcher List to discuss Tigers pitchers. Everyone, I'd like to welcome Nick Pollack, founder of Pitcher List, to the Days of Roar podcast. He's been here too many times to count, and we keep bringing him back because he's just that good. Nick Pollack, thank you for joining me.
What is happening? So great to be back here, Evan. Thanks so much for the invite.
Let's jump right into the big question that I know everybody is looking at as we get closer and closer to the end of the season. Tarik Skubal versus Garrett Crochet for the 2025 American League Cy Young Award. Detroit Tigers left-hander Tarik Skubal, 28 starts, 180 innings, 2.10 ERA, 28 walks, 222 strikeouts, 6.5 F/WAR. Boston Red Sox left-hander Garrett Crochet, 28 starts, 178 and 1/3 innings, 2.67 ERA, 42 walks, 218 strikeouts, 5.0 F/WAR. Tarik Skubal leads the American League with a 2.10 ERA, and he leads MLB with 180 innings and 222 strikeouts. Is Tarik Skubal the clear-cut favorite to win his second Cy Young Award in a row? Or could we see a new Cy Young winner in the American League?
So this is kind of funny. As someone who's so into pitching analytics and understanding the little intricacies of how they get their outs and their arsenal, my take on the Cy Young, which I could probably do this entire podcast, is it is an achievement award, not a overall who is the better pitcher award. And what that means to me is literally there are two stats that are the most important, and everything else is just if it's too close to tell. And that is, how many runs did you allow score for your team across how long did you express that? So it's ERA and innings pitched. And that is all that matters to me about the Cy Young. So Tarik Skubal, 218 ERA, 173 innings. That is, to me, a much better performance than Garrett Crochet's higher ERA, around the same amount of innings. And I know that's crazy. My gosh, strikeouts, he's so good. In the game of baseball, it doesn't matter how many strikeouts you get if you still allow runs to score. You are not a better pitcher for your team if runs have scored. So it's Skubal, and I think a lot of people are just going to see this low ERA, which Skubal should hold relatively closely for the rest of the season. It's pretty hard to deny that he's very much the front runner at the moment for the Cy Young.
What do you think that means for Tarik Skubal? Back-to-back Cy Young winners. We haven't seen that done in the American League since Pedro Martinez in 1999-2000. If Tarik Skubal is able to do it, what does that mean about who he is as a pitcher, and maybe as we look down the road, what it means about his legacy one day?
Well, I do want to mention at least that the two guys here are both southpaws. And this is something that I've been talking about with Ian Osiris on our podcast, The Craft. There's a great article by Robert Nesbitt on The Athletic about it, where left-handers have an advantage. And we've kind of always known this as like, hey kids, I'm sorry, I go to my best friends and I make sure that their new kids throw their left arm because yes, you want a scholarship and all, and you have a cheaper education, but it's actually something that's still in the majors. Right-handers say, yeah, I just don't see them as much. I'm not as comfortable against them. And when you see a southpaw with a changeup, well, we've seen guys like Mitch Ferris, who throws 90 miles per hour, having a successful debut for the Angels because he threw a 77 mile per hour changeup. We just saw Andrew Alvarez with the Nationals do it. We saw Parker Messick. We keep seeing these lefties do this. And then when you have an elite changeup like Tarik Skubal has, and then you also have this 97, 98 mile per hour velocity, that is what really takes him to the next level. I mean, look at Cole Reagan's as well. It's the same kind of thing, but Skubal just does it better with even more additions to his arsenal. So yeah, Skubal should be able to continue to perform like this as long as the changeup is still very effective. And he doesn't even need to be at 97, 98. If he's even doing it at 95, 96, this should still be effective, just as we saw in 2023 when he first came back from his surgery. So yeah, this is far and away the number one pitcher in the American League, if not really in all of baseball at the moment. He's going deeper into games and doing more consistently than Paul Skeens. And it's more sustainable because we have seen this package work as a southpaw across the majors, more so than what Skeens is doing. And with Skeens also being more reliant on the velocity that Skubal is. So I hope the legacy is that Tarik Skubal does this for a very long time now, moving forward, as he is 28 at the moment. It will be turning 29 in November. Yeah, this could be the new wave of your Max Scherzers and your Justin Verlanders and Clayton Kershaws.
Are there any other Cy Young contenders? Like, obviously, it's Tarik Skubal and Garrett Crochet at the top, but talk to me about guys like Jacob deGrom, Hunter Brown, Brian Wu, Max Fried, Joe Ryan, Framber Valdez, like some of the guys who probably aren't going to win the award, but they could be in the top 5 on a lot of ballots.
It's kind of interesting. There are awards with all of them. And it's so easy to just point at Skubal and Crochet and be like, well, yeah, you guys are absurd. Hunter Brown is a very strange one to me. It's an odd season because if you try to describe what does Hunter Brown do as a pitcher, you can't really nail it down. It's like, cool, all right, he throws 96, 97, he leans into the four-seamer, but doesn't always know that's going to be there. So sometimes the sinker will be there and be the main thing against right-handers. Oh, on other days, he'll have his curveball also there and maybe some changeups. He's always figuring it out, but it's always just good enough because he's at it as velocity. And I think that does kind of outline the fact that, yeah, he's had this great season, but it's not as obvious as some others. I also do want to highlight the fact that Jacob deGrom is still pitching. It's September and he's still pitching and he's not had an extended IL stint or anything like that. I think that's something we should note and talk about, just our bias of him having zero chance of that happening, and it did, and what it means about Tommy John surgeries and coming back as well. Max Fried fell off, of course, in the second half. So is Framber Valdez, and just for his attitude, I feel like he shouldn't get it. And then you have Brian Wu. Honestly, I saw on The Athletic, Saris put out his rotation piece about the top 3 rotations in entering the playoffs at the end of today. And I think he felt that that Luis Castillo had to be there because it's Luis Castillo. He's the vet. They're going to trust him in that kind of playoff situation. But I think a lot of people will say, look, yes, Logan Gilbert and George Kirby, absolutely. But Brian Wu should certainly be inside of that 3 as well. And Ian knows that. And he's one of those guys that I think is getting very undervalued. I've compared him to Zach Wheeler as well, as just kind of, look, you're going fastball heavy and you have a very flat attack angle, all of that fun stuff. Same with Joe Ryan in there too. You kind of are saying like, look, you need to have an elite fastball. And if you don't, then you need to have a very wide arsenal, but not at like 91, like Max Fried is at 95. They're all very interesting pitchers. They all kind of do different things with it. At the end of the day, it's just so dominant with Tarik Skubal. I mean, everything he does is just so hard to hit from the left side. Elite changeup. Garrett Crochet with fantastic extension, elite velocity, and pitches that just look so similar inside the zone with four-seamer, sinker, and cutter. And then, of course, the sweeper is now getting more attention. These guys are bonkers, and it's so fun having bonkers pitchers, Evan.
Let's go back to the best pitcher in the world. How does 2025 Tarik Skubal compare to 2024 Tarik Skubal? From an arsenal standpoint, from a results standpoint, if you go back and look, from 2024 to 2025, the ERA is better. From 2.39 in 2024 to 2.10 in 2025. The walks per 9 innings are better, from 1.6 to 1.4. The strikeouts per 9 innings are better, from 10.7 to 11.1. Improved ERA with fewer walks and more strikeouts. That's what I see. What do you see?
I mean, okay, so there's a couple things here. One, the vert on his four-seamer is a little bit better. He gained an inch of that. So it's 16 to 17 as opposed to 15 to 16. The vert being the rise up of the fastball. You want around 15 to 16 as like average, and sometimes can be considered dead zone. If you've seen in the past also that Tarik Skubal's four-seamer hasn't been the most overwhelming pitch itself. And it's kind of weird that like last year, for example, 14% swing strike rate on it, but you're like, wait, shouldn't this be like an 18% or so? It's coming in so hard, and it did jump up to 16% this year. So that's been a big improvement on it because of that vert on it. He also embraced the changeup to lefties more. It was something he only threw about 10% of the time. In 2024, the slider was more of the focus, and now that's jumped up a lot more. He's had a lot of success, and it's just, that's your best pitch, Tarik. Like, you should throw that more often. He understood that, and that's really changed. But for the most part, this is kind of the same guy. I mean, yes, a 2.39 ERA versus a 2.18. It seems like such a big difference to us, but that's really one start or so that can really affect that. And what's even funnier is that Tarik Skubal, I remember the first 2 weeks of the season, that wasn't good. That was us being like, hey, is Tarik Skubal? Yeah, we thought he was a number 1 SP, but like maybe he's not. And I remember a lot of people thinking like, okay, cool. I gotta think of him along the lines of maybe 10 to 20 or so. But no. He just completely dominated since then. So you can even argue that he's been a 2 ERA pitcher since the middle of April, which is also absolutely bonkers. But for the most part, I mean, it's pretty much the same guy. He's just refining what he does.
So you wouldn't say one version is more impressive, whether it's 2025 Tarik Skubal or 2024 Tarik Skubal. You see them as the same pitcher. And I guess if that's the case, what does that say about Tarik Skubal being able to do it back-to-back years the way that he has, where it's not just, oh, this is Tarik Skubal for 1 year, and then the next season performance isn't as good. No, he's been able to do this really since he came back from the flexor strain surgery that he had back July 4th, 2023, came back from that, dominated to finish 2023, dominated in 2024, has dominated yet again in 2025. That must say a lot about Scoob.
Oh, 100%. And really what we do see sometimes is that when you have that breakout season where you increase your velocity again. So remember, 2022 Skubal was around 94 on his four-seamer, showed up in the second half of 23 and had all of a sudden 96. And I'm going, whoa, this is new. All right, I'm in on that. And we didn't really know if that was going to stick. I remember entering 24, being like, okay, hold on. You get this extra adrenaline. You feel so good. You've been gone for so long. It might come down over a larger season. And that didn't happen. He went up another tick to about 97. And what we thought would happen was saying, okay, look, he's done this for a full year now. This is the biggest season he's had, I think, in his career, 192 innings. We might see that not carry over. Might be some fatigue, some sort of wear and tear, especially considering that he went to the playoffs as well. And we haven't seen it. And what that tells me is that's what Skubal's doing is he's found his routine. He's found his way to stabilize it. So it makes it feel a lot more confident moving forward as well. And something that you should be banking on moving forward for Tarik Skubal.
Let's evaluate the Tigers starting rotation. Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, and Charlie Morton, with Chris Paddack recently moved to the bullpen. Tarik Skubal has a 2.10 ERA. Jack Flaherty has a 4.85 ERA, including a 6.21 ERA in his last 15 starts. Casey Mize has a 3.87 ERA, including a 6.53 ERA in his last 9 starts. Charlie Morton has a 5.59 ERA, including a 6.09 ERA since the trade deadline. And Chris Paddack has a 5.37 ERA, including a 6.89 ERA since the trade deadline. Can you blame Tigers fans for being concerned about this starting rotation?
Oh, you absolutely should be. And what's really funny to me is I would argue that the best 1, 2, 3 for the Tigers is Tarik Skubal, Troy Melton, and Sawyer Gipson-Long. And it is a little frustrating, honestly, looking at the Tigers and saying, look, you have a successful season right now, and you never really want to assume that this window that you have for success, it will always be there, right? Yes, you had this incredible second half in 2024, and look at that, it's carried over into 2025, but I hope that's going to be in the same case in 2026. And for the Tigers to position them in a way where Troy Melton isn't a part of that rotation, it looks like, for the playoffs. And maybe Sawyer Gipson-Long is fighting for it now as he has taken over for Chris Paddack in the rotation. It's possible that that could be the case. But it is really disappointing to see what's happened to Jack Flaherty. He's someone that I certainly believed in, where his secondaries, that is the curveball and the slider, have been incredibly productive pitches for a long time. And generally they are in rhythm where they work well at the bottom of the zone and mask the four-seamer that can be hit. But one of the problems that we have seen is a dip in velocity at times. And what is really frustrating is actually on Friday night against the White Sox, seeing Flaherty go 93 to 94 in his previous few starts, really looking better at that in the second half, to all of a sudden dip to 92 miles per hour in that game against the White Sox is very concerning. That pitch got hit very hard because of it, and we had that poor evening. So I don't think that I would be confident in Flaherty as the second starter in this rotation entering the playoffs. The good news is you do have 3 more weeks, and things could change a little bit in Detroit. You might get Sawyer Gipson-Long looking like much more of a workhorse that you can rely on. Charlie Morton, after getting bruised against 2 very tough offenses, now should look actually pretty good for the next couple of weeks. The Tigers do have a better schedule. There might be a lot more confidence for him. His curveball's looking great. So that's a nice little addition at the deadline that I do like, much more so than Chris Paddack. And Casey Mize is a wild card. It's a four-seamer that can be spotted really well at the top of the zone. It can be at 95, 96 at times, and it can fall down to 94 and change. The splitter is in and out. The number 3 pitch, I don't know if I should call it a slider, cutter, curve. He kind of changes it per game. And he's been trying to find it a lot throughout the season. But there are these moments where, yeah, this is a solid 5+ innings of 1 or 2 run ball that make the playoffs work for a team. I think there's a lot of hoopla about the high upside guys, the ones who will get lots of strikeouts and be flashy. But what can win playoff series are those guys that just shove for 6 innings at 2 earned runs, maybe even 5 and 1 earned run or so. I call them the Toby types, the boring ones who you don't really like that's in the office, but they get the work done, right? And like Toby, of course, from The Office. And Mize can be that. Mize could really show up for a really good game 3. It's just who's going to be that game 2, and you don't really want that to be Mize. So good luck. I would feel a little anxious heading into the playoffs with this rotation.
Yeah, if the Tigers go into the ALDS with these 3 starters, game 1, Tarik Skubal, game 2, Jack Flaherty, game 3, Charlie Morton, is that a recipe for an early exit, regardless of who you're playing?
Yes, I would say so. And it honestly puts so much pressure on winning the game with Tarik Skubal. And there's something to be said about this of not lining up your ace with the other ace. I know that sounds crazy, but let's say you go in a series against, I don't know, let's say it's the Red Sox and you have to go against Garrett Crochet in the first one, and then you get maybe Brian Bayo and then Lucas Giolito. Maybe you want to throw Charlie Morton against Crochet, so then you ensure that you get the win from Skubal instead of trying to match up against theirs. Maybe it's 1 earned run from each guy. That's not beneficial for you. It's going to be tough. However, I still think that the Tigers should try to make Melton stretched out. I think Melton is an absolute stud. I think he's phenomenal. He has such a wide arsenal. He has elite stuff across the board. I think he has above average command as well. And he, to me, would be the SB2 for the Tigers. And I kind of just hate the idea that it's Jackson Jobe 2.0 in this way. And just let Troy pitch, please.
Well, I'll tell you the way the Tigers view it is Troy Melton out of the bullpen. We get him 3 times per week and we can use him whenever we want. Troy Melton, the rotation, you use him once a week and you don't get to choose when he pitches. He's lined up to pitch on certain days. Whereas out of the bullpen, you can use him 2 or 3 times in a week. You can pitch him for 1 inning. You can pitch him for 4 innings. You get to choose the batter that he comes in for. The Tigers view Troy Melton as more valuable coming out of the bullpen as opposed to starting at this point in time. What do you think about that? And then also too, Troy Melton across the board. Like, what's the upside here? What makes him good? For me, I love that he misses bats in the strike zone with the 4-seam fastball. It's a really good indicator. But yeah, Troy Melton, the role, the stuff, what do you think?
So, okay, there are a couple of things to talk about with this. One is how quick is the hook, right? Let's say you have Flaherty going. Are you going to be putting in Troy Melton in the 2nd inning? If things aren't going right, then how long are you going to trust him for from there, right? Is it going to be up to 50 pitches? Is it going to be longer than that or so? It's a case where I think, you know what? Just do what you did last year in the regular season a lot with Brant Herter. Have an opener and then go with Troy Melton for 3 or 4 and really put yourself in that situation where you aren't already in a hole if you are going with Troy Melton, right? That's the way I see it. At least if you want to be careful with it and say, look, we don't want to overexert him and we want to be able to have him maybe 3 of those 5 games as opposed to maybe 1 of them, then okay, make it go 3 innings at first and then piece it together. Maybe do a piggyback with him and sort of give some long or maybe one of these other guys. But you get the next couple of weeks to assess what probability of Jack Flaherty, Charlie Morton, Casey Mize you really want to roll with for the playoffs and feel confident of that out of the gate. And what makes Troy Melton make me act this way is it's just elite stuff, really. Like, as you said, like swing and miss ability, his 17% swing strike rate on his 4-seamer is 94th percentile. It is a pitch that comes in flat. And what that means is that the steep angle that you normally see for high 4-seamers matches the same angle of the bats when it swings upstairs. And it's really hard to make the bat travel a flat, like a parallel with the ground. However, the flatter you get the baseball on that attack angle of like the angle goes into the zone, the fewer times the ball is going to intersect with that bat path, right? So guys are going to miss it more the flatter it gets. Yeah, he has 87th percentile flatness, which is great. His 4-seamer also comes with 7 feet of extension, which is 84th percentile. His velocity 87 is 84th percentile. It's so good. So that as your foundation, and one that he throws strikes so often, 71% of the time, just sets up the rest of his stuff because he has this whiffable slider that he throws 25% of the time. That's 19% swing strikes. He has a sinker that he's able to mix in appropriately. There's a cutter if he needs a strike as well that doesn't allow many hits. There's a splitter that shows up whenever it wants against lefties and a curveball that he can flip into the zone for a called strike. It's awesome. This is the mold of every stud that we're looking for out of a prospect. And I'm excited for him in 2026. I'll tell you that. So I just see this. Look, you have Troy Melton with this ability, and then you have Jack Flaherty who's wondering, hey, is my velocity okay? Am I going to be able to mask that four-seamer in the zone or not? And you have Charlie Morton who says, all right, I have a really good curveball, but will I have anything else to help me get through 5 innings here? It's just so much more convincing with Troy Melton.
We talked about the starting rotation: Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Charlie Morton. For that 5th spot in the rotation, no longer is it Chris Paddack. The Tigers are planning to tap back into pitching chaos, which they showcased in 2024, both at the end of the regular season and this year. We're going to see guys like Sawyer Gipson-Long, Cater Montero, Troy Melton, Jose Urquidy, Brant Herter coming out of the bullpen in those bulk reliever roles. What did you think about pitching chaos last year, where there's an opener and then a bulk reliever and then the high leverage guys? And do you think it's sustainable for the Tigers this year?
Well, what was crazy about last year is how good Brant Herter was. I mean, I really can't emphasize this enough. His sinker was one of the highest performing pitches we have via PLV. That is our pitch quantifier here at Pitcher List, that says it's not about like just the stuff. It's about the movement of it when it's thrown, what the expectation is from the hitter, and then what actually happens. And Brant Herter's sinker was one of the best pitches in baseball last year. So there's a big reason why that chaos worked so well in 2024. Obviously, Herter hasn't had the same exact success this year. However, Sawyer Gipson-Long is someone that I think is going to be phenomenal in 2026. And it's a little strange for him right now because he hasn't been able to get the proper footing and really get into rhythm that he needs to be able to execute like a proper 5th starter. But his skills are also really, really good. If you remember him from 2023, it was a sinker that had a ton of drop, and it still does. It's a true sinker, and he pairs it with elite extension. He gets out so far, 97 percentile, 7.3 feet. That makes it so that this sinker is really even harder to deal with because it has such a late break to it. Its velocity has gone down, which is a little frustrating from previous years. It used to be about 92, 93. It's at 91 now. However, pairing that with a slider and a changeup that both can miss bats is just a beautiful thing. And I also even want to mention that, guess what? It is a somewhat flat four-seamer for Sawyer Gipson-Long as well, if he's able to elevate that and go high for a surprise strikeout. So I see this package from Sawyer Gipson-Long actually as one of the ideals for the playoffs. As I'm saying, you don't want the inefficient high strikeout guy necessarily. You want the guy that can be the Framber Valdez, the Dallas Keuchel, which is the neckbeard approach. If you don't know that, is a term I have for throwing down and just outside of the zone, right? So you have the edges for your mutton chops as you go too far away or too far inside. Then you have, of course, your big goatee and beard underneath the zone. And Sawyer Gipson-Long is built for that. And you've seen Dallas Keuchel just cruise through like 6-7 innings in the playoffs in his prime. I think Sawyer Gipson-Long is the kind of guy that can do that too. So I'm actually really excited about Sawyer Gipson-Long for the next couple of weeks in September as a real addition for this rotation for the playoffs, because this could be that guy that really unlocks the stronger potential to get to the ALCS if he's able to be that game 2 starter and give you at least 5 innings of production.
We just talked about Troy Melton, who ranks as the Tigers' number 6 prospect in MLB Pipeline. Who do you think is the next up-and-coming Tigers pitching prospect? We saw Jackson Jobe. We're seeing Troy Melton. Is there anyone coming, or is that an area of weakness when you evaluate the Tigers farm system? Because for me, when I look at it, you see Troy Melton there at number 6 on MLB Pipeline's top 30 for the Tigers organization. After that, Jaden Hamm at number 11. Tigers aren't very high on him. After that, it's Owen Hall. He hasn't pitched more than 4 games in A-ball. He's been hurt. Then it's Andrew Sears. You look at him, he's at number 15 on the list. He's the guy who has a 5.84 ERA in 5 starts in Double-A Erie. So there's question marks there. Like, it just doesn't seem like there's a lot of pitching depth in this organization when it comes to top of the line prospects. Are you seeing the same thing, or am I missing something?
No, you're exactly right here. Hamm is the highest rated one for our dynasty team here in Pitcher List. And it's not impressive in the way that Troy Melton is. It's not as electric for what he provides. And I really do think it's one of the situations where you just got to kind of hope that somebody goes through something in the winter. And Troy Melton wasn't even on my radar massively, and he exploded onto the scene this season. So that's what you're hoping for here out of the Tigers prospects. But as of right now, as far as pitchers go, yeah, there isn't something that you really are circling for next year.
We talked about the struggles of Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, but Casey Mize made the All-Star game in 2025. We have to remember that. At the same time, before his last outing, he had a 7.20 ERA in 8 starts. For Casey Mize, what are you noticing? What's going on there? Why has he had such a struggle since finding out that he made the All-Star game? What was he doing right before then? And if he were to get back on track, if he were to get back to that All-Star caliber type performance, what does he need to do?
I mean, kind of what he just did. It was 95.7 on the four-seamer. That's really been a big issue for him. He was down to as low as 93.8 on August 4th on that four-seamer. And this is really supposed to be the foundation for him. He is one of those guys that has good extension, a generally flat-ish four-seamer. It's kind of average in that way, but it also does come with a decent amount of vert. And that should set the tone for everything that he does, because underneath that goes the splitter. And then off of that goes the sinker or the breaking ball. And what he did in his last start, he nailed out the top of the zone, beat a very good Mets offense that's been scorching hot for the last month or so. And if you can do that, really just repeat it, please, then you're fine. Then you're totally okay with Casey Mize. It's always going to be a deal with right-handers though, because the splitter will help a ton against lefties, which opens the door for more breaking balls against righties. And that's always been the weakness for Casey Mize. So it could be something of, hey, make sure you nail that four-seamer up. You have that sinker playing inside to jam righties, and then the surprise slider or cutter, curve, or maybe the rare splitter to a right-hander will be all right. But just make sure that lefties are dealt with properly. And you can figure something out with righties. Keep that velocity above 95 comfortably, and that should be fine for Casey Mize.
Want to go back to the trade deadline. The Tigers added Chris Paddack and Charlie Morton to their starting rotation. Like we said, Chris Paddack already moved to the bullpen. Charlie Morton has had some good, some bad. Were those the right guys for the Tigers to acquire at the trade deadline? Or would you have rather seen internal additions? Sawyer Gipson-Long, Kyler Montero, Troy Melton, maybe even Brant Herter before he got injured. He's coming back, by the way, but he's been hurt recently. Would you rather have seen some combination of those guys stretched out, inserted into the rotation, and, filled those roles internally as opposed to going out of the trade deadline and getting Chris Paddack and Charlie Morton? Or do you think the Tigers did the best that they could considering the situation that they were in?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they could do a whole lot at the deadline to get a big sweeping move. And as you saw at the deadline, the price for starting pitchers was absurdly expensive, to the point that we didn't see Zach Gallen move. We didn't see Sandy Alcantara or Edward Cabrera move. And you saw the package that the Red Sox had to send for Dustin May, which is still the most startling trade of this deadline to me. And getting Charlie Morton and Chris Paddack as innings guys. It was a situation where the Tigers needed to get through the season and feel like, okay, we have Sawyer Gipson-Long, who we want to be a little careful with. And yes, you did hit the IL as well. So, okay, we got to get through that. Hey, Troy Melton, we love him, but it's very clear that they want to protect his workload and don't want to overuse him right now. And that opened the door, said, wait, hold on a second. We need help. Alex Cobb isn't really doing much of anything. So getting Charlie Morton, I think, was a great deal for them. I think that's exactly the kind of guy they should have gone for. Chris Paddack made sense. And I'm not the biggest fan of what he does. I think there are times that it's exceptional. I've confused him and Casey Mize so many times in my head because they pretty much have the same arsenal, except Chris Paddack is about a tick lower on his fastball, and it's quote unquote a Vulcan change, not a splitter. But the Vulcan, if you don't know, is between your middle and your ring finger throwing it, essentially like a splitter. And by the way, that's a ridiculous thing to do. I don't understand how people feel more comfortable doing that. Try and just hold a baseball, everyone. Do the Vulcan sign, put a baseball between that instead of your index finger and your middle finger. It's ridiculous. But I would say that Chris Paddack does not have the same feel for his cutter or his slider as Mize does. Mize has gotten a little bit better at his. So it made sense just to get through the regular season. But you can see now, even in September, the plan wasn't really for Paddack to be that rotation piece. And I don't really think that the Tigers considered Charlie Morton as a major rotation piece either for the playoffs. But yeah, I think he's actually a pretty solid pitcher, especially since he came back from the IL in June and entered the rotation again for the Orioles. Charlie Morton has been one of the more surprising pitchers in that time.
The Chris Paddack trade was triggered by the Reese Olson injury. Reese Olson.
Oh yeah, right. Of course. How could I forget that one? That was such a big hit. I was so sad to hear that.
Well, just to dive into that, right? I mean, this is a guy who is ruled out for the regular season, likely the postseason. It's a right shoulder strain. He's just started throwing, so that's a positive sign. The Tigers are hoping to get him into his offseason program successfully. Maybe there's a chance. Maybe if the Tigers make a deep postseason run, we could see Reese Olson back on the bump again in 2025. But it seems much more likely that the plan here is just to get him to the offseason successfully, let him have a normal offseason, and then we'll see him back healthy again in 2026 spring training. But the impact of the Reese Olson injury, and this has been a few years now where this guy has had injuries that have put him on the shelf. How much does that sting? How much does it hurt the Tigers rotation when you really take a step back and you look at, hey, this team is going to be going into the ALDS coming up in October, and they're going to be going into it without Reese Olson. That must be really difficult, right?
Oh, completely. I mean, yeah, there's your game 2 guy. And that's it, just gone. So you're trying to figure that one out. One of my favorite Reese Olson stats, so I do have to say this, he threw 324 sinkers this year as a number 1 thrown pitch. He returned 3 whiffs on that pitch. 3. That's a sub 1% swing strike rate. And not to say that sinkers get a ton of them. It was a 3.5% last year. It's just only 3 is just okay. It's not quite as befuddling to hitters as we have seen in the past, right? And the story of Reese Olson this year while watching him is that it was ebbs and flows of him being in rhythm with his slider and changeup. That's really what made it so sad for me, is I was looking forward to Reese Olson getting his footing essentially and getting into rhythm of those pitches. And so if you're thinking about that very deep on maybe the World Series or so, maybe Reese Olson's ready to go. I would have skepticism on that just because we've seen in the past that Reese has to get both of those pitches, the slider and the changeup, really cooking to mask the fact that he doesn't have a good fastball. The sinker isn't that good. He can command it a little better than others, which can allow him to get away with it. But the four-seamer, oh gosh, he's got to stop utilizing that four-seamer. I think it's a very, very harmful pitch to him. And it's not a pitcher that just shows up and is absolutely great for your teams. It's not a veteran as well who has dealt with a situation before and is able to make those in-game adjustments during the playoffs. That's, I mean, not to say that Reese isn't more experienced in your typical young arm and capable. It's just, we see that difference a lot and it would be harder for him to adjust. So I wouldn't hold my breath on that one, but Reese Olson is still a very center piece of this rotation for 2026, 2027 and beyond. I'd be very excited about it. I think in the future, look to see how he manages his fastballs, because he does not want to be ultimately a 40-50% four-seamer plus sinker guy. And if there's going to be a cutter that replaces that four-seamer to left-handers, how is he navigating that? Because that has always been his weakness.
Another injury. Did you see anything from Jackson Jobe pre-Tommy John surgery that impressed you? Or do you have long-term concerns about him reaching that ace caliber, Cy Young caliber status? We won't see him again until late 2026 or early 2027.
Yeah, I completely missed on Jobe. That is, I expected to get more out of his four-seamer than we did. That coming in at 96, 97, paired with what I thought would be good vert on it and attack angle and everything. And it seems that they actually weren't much of an impact as far as whiffs go. He doesn't have good extension either. At 6 feet is very low. It's 8th percentile. And when you think about that with extension, that generally means about a tick or two down from what you see. So you see 96, 97, that actually kind of means it was more like 95 to batters because it's not coming in at 7 feet, 7.5, it's 6. So to give him more time, right? And to see that Jackson Jobe understood that his four-seamer wasn't that pitch, and to see him shift what he utilized in games was awesome. It was something you don't normally see a ton from these young arms. Like, okay, this is what I do, and I'm just going to do this. I don't know what's going on. You don't really see that. That flexibility is very rigid initially. But no, we saw more sliders. We saw more changeups. We saw these cutters. I think he should be throwing his curveball more because the movement on that is absolutely bonkers and is elite. And these are the little elements that over time we saw Jobe change his mix, change his arsenal, and really figure himself out better and better until he got hurt. And it's incredibly frustrating again to see that where you're like, oh, cool, development is happening. And okay, now we're going to have to restart it again in a year and a half. So hopefully we do get a healthy Jackson Jobe in the future. And yes, that won't be the same kind of image of four-seamer first. Like Troy Melton's four-seamer is better than Jackson Jobe's. And if there's one thing you want to bank on for young pitchers and developing, it is a four-seamer foundation. It is by far the highest correlation to stud pitchers in baseball. So Jackson Jobe not necessarily having that, but having excellent secondaries, well, maybe there's something to work on there and really lean into that will allow him to be more like the classic Cleveland Guardians pitchers, like Shane Bieber and Corey Kluber and Carlos Carrasco, who were not overwhelming four-seamer and sinker guys. They were more about the secondaries that they had. So I'm still very excited for Jackson Jobe. I feel like what you saw at the beginning of this year is just the tip of the iceberg and a showcase of a young pitcher doing what he needs to for development. And I'm excited for him to pick that up, hopefully at the end of 2026, but likely in 2027.
Last thing before we get you out of here, any thoughts about a contract prediction for Tarik Skubal once he reaches free agency after the 2026 season, assuming he stays healthy? I've been saying since early December that he could become the first pitcher to earn a $400 million contract, surpassing the previous record set by Yoshinobu Yamamoto at $325 million and Garrett Cole at $324 million. Do you think Tarik Skubal, once he reaches free agency after the 2026 season, is going to be worth $400 million?
Yeah, sure. Why not? What is this economy anyway, Evan, huh? You know, like everything, I'm getting a coffee and all of a sudden what used to be $4 is $8 now. It's like, what is this? Okay. So yeah, I mean, the old, 100 million is the new 300 million or whatever it is. It's just all keeps going up. And if Tarik Skubal has the same season again next year, which he likely will, I mean, there's no reason to believe that he won't. Yeah, he's going to make bank. I don't expect the Tigers to do that. Do you expect the Tigers to do that? I don't see any reason to believe it.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay. That stinks because I'm going to tell you this, guys. Every owner of every team is absurdly rich and can afford it. And anytime they cry poor, just don't listen to them. So they should be paying Tarik Skubal. They just should, because it makes everyone in Detroit happier. And you guys deserve that. So yeah, I wish they were to pay Tarik Skubal. And honestly, when you look at it with WAR per million, essentially, is something I think about all the time of like when you're looking at the free agent market, how much WAR do you get back for X amount of $1 million? My internal calculation of it is it used to be like 8 million. I think it's closer to like 12 million now or something like that. So let's say it's 400 million. How many years would that be, Evan?
Probably 10 years, 400 million. Sure. Let's go with that. It's pretty standard.
Okay. So cool. That's 40 million a year then, right? So that means essentially let's just make it really simple. 4 WAR a season is what you're paying for with that. And that usually in those kind of deals is always front loaded in the sense that you're expecting higher production than the annual value early on, and then you're paying for it later on, right? So yeah, that seems fine with me. And especially a guy like Tarik Skubal, who is a lefty that has a ton of velocity now, which will come down, but he'll still be effective at 94 or 95 with this command, with the changeup, with the wide arsenal. Like, this is not a pitcher that is going to completely flounder later on. Is he going to be a sub-3 ERA forever over that? No. By the time he's like 33 or 34, he'll probably be around mid-3s or so, but that's still going to be effective if we do believe that he is this workhorse type, which he's done now for 2 seasons.
I'm sure Tarik Skubal will look great in Dodger blue in 2027.
Oh, don't you dare.
All right, Nick.
Don't do that to everybody.
Thank you so much for all the insight about the Detroit Tigers pitching staff.
You'll be a New York Met is honestly what it'll be.
Hey, thank you for breaking everything down, man. Tigers pitching staff, specifically the starting pitchers. And we'll see what happens with Tarik Skubal and Garrett Crochet in the AL Cy Young race with a few weeks left in the season. As always, thank you for joining the Days of Roar podcast.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. It's great to see you, Evan.
Everyone, that was Nick Pollack, founder of Pitcher List. We have more to discuss this week about the Tigers. But first, let's take a break. We're back. Thanks again to Nick Pollack for joining the Days of Roar podcast. Once again, Evan Petzold of the Detroit Free Press with Chris Brown of Tigers Minor League Report. We got to keep talking about this pitching staff because it's the big concern right now, and it's the big question mark. It's the big topic of conversation. It is the one thing that may hold the Tigers back from making a deep run in the postseason. Let's go to Chris Paddack. The news that the Tigers moved him to the bullpen for performance reasons. What are the Tigers going to do about the 5th spot in the rotation. They currently have 4 starters in that rotation: Tarik Skubal, Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, and Charlie Morton. And it's no surprise that Chris Paddack got moved to the bullpen. He has a 6.89 ERA since the trade deadline. He got crushed for 6 runs in his first relief appearance. And to be fair, it's really not all that surprising when you consider that Chris Paddack has a career 4.63 ERA in his 7-year MLB career. He's obsessed with throwing the ball in the strike zone, and his stuff isn't very good. So when you combine a bad track record with obsessive strike throwing and bad stuff, that tells me teams are going to be swinging a lot against you because you're throwing hittable pitches in the zone. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That's pretty much Chris Paddack. Now, we'll see how the transition to the bullpen goes. He has had some success out of the bullpen in his past, though he hasn't pitched out of the bullpen very often. But in the past, with the Twins, especially in the postseason, he did have some success there. We'll see how the transition goes, but so far, not so good. As for that 5th spot in the rotation, the Tigers have to decide what they're going to do, and we'll see what they do for Thursday's game against the New York Yankees. We're going to see Casey Mize on Tuesday against the Yankees, Jack Flaherty on Wednesday against the Yankees, Tarik Skubal on Friday against the Miami Marlins, and Charlie Morton on Saturday against the Marlins. But what about Thursday's series finale against the Yankees? It could be Sawyer Gipson-Long. It could be Kiter Montero. It could be a bullpen day. Don't rule out the return of pitching chaos for the 5th spot in the rotation. I could see the Tigers going with an opener in Thursday's game, then turning things over to either Gipson-Long or Montero as a bulk reliever. We could see that moving forward, especially with Montero, Gipson-Long, Troy Melton as guys who can pitch multiple innings. You got Jose Urquidy coming soon after probably one more outing on his rehab assignment. Brant Herter, who is key to pitching chaos in 2024. He is starting a rehab assignment recently. He got that underway, so he's well on his way to returning. The Tigers have a lot of these pitchers capable of throwing between 1 and 4 innings. That helps Tigers manager AJ Hinch. If he wants to make a quick decision with Jack Flaherty, Casey Mize, Charlie Morton, like if those guys are through 3 or 4 innings and they got a tough pocket of hitters coming up that maybe saw him well the first time, and you don't want Casey Mize to have to face somebody a second or a third time through, well, then you can get him out of there and you can go to one of these guys who can pitch anywhere between 1 and 4 innings. That allows you as a manager to make a quick decision. Additionally, if you see a guy like Charlie Morton, he's spraying his fastball early and he's throwing 30 pitches in the first inning. Well, if you have a handful of these guys who can go between 1 and 4 innings, then you can pull him. If the starter runs up their pitch count early, you can get him out of there and you don't have to feel like your bullpen is as taxed because you have guys like Montero, Gipson-Long, Melton, Urquidy, Herter, these guys who can go 1 to 4 innings that can then save your high leverage guys and they can bridge that gap even in a game in which you have Charlie Morton throwing 30 pitches in the first inning or 70 pitches through 3 innings. That's not a recipe for success, but you can save yourself when you have guys with some length in the bullpen. And then on top of that, you do have the strategy standpoint of getting bulk innings from somebody in that traditional, I call it traditional, but that traditional pitching chaos strategy where you can go with an opener and then you can go with the bulk reliever and then you get things over to the back end and you can go to Will Vest and you can go to Tommy Kahnle and you can go to Rafael Montero. So I do think having a handful of relievers capable of pitching between 1 and 4 innings, it opens up a ton of possibilities for the Tigers. But here's the catch. All of the pitchers have to be pitching well for pitching chaos to be successful. Otherwise, it fails. That's what we saw in 2024. No matter who they put on the mound, it was a successful outing. This year, it has not been the case. So if you want to go to pitching chaos, whether it's for one day or whether it's for quick decisions with the starters or when the starter runs the pitch count up or just from a strategy standpoint, if you want to go to pitching chaos, you need everyone to be pitching well out of that bullpen. And so far, that just hasn't been the case. So Chris Paddack to the bullpen, maybe a little bit of pitching chaos for that 5th spot in the rotation. But the bullpen looks pretty interesting when you take a peek at what they have going on with a lot of these guys who can pitch between 1 and 4 innings. We'll see how that shakes out in the final 3 weeks of the season as we look towards October.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, they had Gipson-Long basically replace Paddack as the starter against the Mets, right? And he gave a homer in the first inning to Pete Alonso. That's no big crime, right? That happens a lot. And then he was good for like the next 2-3 innings. Made 3 innings solid, and then everything fell apart the second time through the order. And I think that's where they have to be careful. They have to manage these guys. You know, maybe they want to try to build them up some more, but I do think they should be looking at these 3 inning chunks No more than 3 innings for these guys. Get them to the order once. Try to get 9 outs without giving up any runs or just 1 run. And Urquidy just worked 3 innings in Toledo. Like you mentioned, it was only like 43 pitches. So I don't know if he'll be doing that in the big leagues or how they'll deploy him. Herter, 1 inning. That's how they're going to use him, I think. And then, Montero, you saw the good and the bad with Montero the other day. He came in, got some outs, and then he hung a slider. Colson Montgomery hit a home run. That's kind of been Montero's bugaboo forever, is that he's got pretty good stuff. At times, he could get through the order 2-3 times, but then he'll leave pitches right over the heart of the plate and they get hit hard. And so I don't know how much you trust him going multiple innings. So they're just going to have to mix and match these guys. We may see Paddack getting multiple innings. It feels like he's kind of relegated to that mop-up Kenta Maeda role now. And I feel for him kind of like I feel for Alex Cobb, right? Like there were some things going on in his personal life, and I can't imagine trying to perform in front of however many thousands of people while that's going on. At the same time, it's your job, and it got really ugly there when he was pitching out of the bullpen. And it's interesting to me, Paddack was a name. He was a prospect. He had some success early on in his career. And the way I kind of look at him is he's just a different organization's Matt Manning, right? Like he was Matt Manning for somebody else, and he's a name.
It's a great way to put it.
And they tried him. They're like, maybe we could fix him, and it's not going great. And by the way, this is a very obvious segue for me, but if people are wondering how Matt Manning is doing, the Tigers traded him, they DFA'd him, right? And then he was traded to the Phillies for a DSL outfielder. And the Phillies are trying to make him a starter again. They sent him to AA Reading instead of AAA. His first outing went fine. 1 run over, I think, 2 innings. And the second outing, not as good. He gave 3 innings. He gave up 1 hit, but walked 5 and 2 wild pitches and gave up 5 earned runs. So I imagine, I didn't watch because I don't care that much, but I imagine they're trying to do something with his mechanics, and it's not working out great. But this is what happens. These guys get a name. They have a little bit of big league success, and other teams keep trying them. And it'll be fascinating to see what happens with Chris Paddack the rest of this year and in the future, if he's ever going to, get a steady job again.
Checking back in on the non-Skubal starters in the rotation. Casey Mize, a little bit better maybe. Jack Flaherty, still bad. Charlie Morton, still bad. Of those 3, who do you have the most confidence in? What have you been seeing from those guys recently? Do you have any hope that Casey Mize can get back to his hey Casey, you've been named an all-star performance? Because really, since he learned that he was an all-star, it's been really bad for a pretty significant period of time now. What's your level of concern? Do you have confidence in one of those guys over the other? And who's going to be the guy to step up for the Tigers? Because somebody from that group needs to step up.
Yeah, where I am right now is it's 100%. What have you done for me lately? So the most recent good outing from one of those 3 guys was Casey Mize, and it was only 5 innings, and he didn't necessarily look great, but he got through it with just 1 run. You're hoping he can come back. I asked me a month ago, and I would have said he was maybe on the outside looking in for a rotation spot in the playoffs. But Flaherty remains absolutely confounding. He'll go out, and he's the guy that's most likely to just shove for 6 innings, and probably the guy that you want as your number 2 starter in the playoffs, just because that's a possibility. But it's been so up and down, it's hard to figure. And Morton's been really disappointing. Like I wanted Charlie Morton. I thought that was a good trade. I looked at his numbers after April, and they were solid. My buddy Jerry McKinnon said looked a little deeper and didn't like the numbers, and it looks like Jerry's right. And Morton he just can't get out of his own way. In his first 2 starts with the Tigers, he walks 2 batters, and one of them was intentional. And then I think he's got 7 in his last 6 innings. He just can't throw strikes right now. And that's what you touched on it earlier. Like if he's spraying the fastball and can't land the curveball early, you got to get somebody warmed up and get some bulk relief, because he's racking up 70 pitches in 3 innings, and it's not working out. And I don't know how you could be confident in him going forward in the playoffs if that's an option in every outing.
Yeah, that's the big problem for me with Charlie Morton. I like Charlie Morton when he is locating his fastball, but if he's not locating his fastball, and if teams can just completely avoid that pitch and say, you know what, we're not even going to swing at fastballs, we're just going to look for the curveball. And yes, the curveball is still nasty. And even when teams know it's coming, it can still get swing and miss. The problem is you hang one curveball and it's gone. Like you hang it, they bang it if they don't have to respect your fastball. And that's exactly what's been going on with Charlie Morton. So he's got to get teams to respect his fastball if he wants to be effective again. The curveball's great, and it misses bats below the zone. Yes, he has hung some, and yes, they have been punished. But I think if he can get hitters to have to respect his fastball again, a lot can change for Charlie Morton, his performance down the stretch. We'll see if he's able to get there. In terms of my confidence level, I think I'm probably the most confident in Jack Flaherty still, and I feel like a psycho for saying that because he has a 6.21 ERA in his last 15 starts, but it's also a 4.11 FIP during those 15 starts. So the underlying metrics suggest that he's been better than a 6 ERA in his last 15 starts. He's profiled more like a 4 ERA. It's still bad. It's just not as bad. So I think the chances of Flaherty like lucking into a good start is just better than Casey Mize or Charlie Morton at this point. If I had to rank them in terms of confidence, I would go Jack Flaherty, Charlie Morton, and Casey Mize. And I think Casey Mize is the toughest of the three pitchers. Like, Casey Mize is a bulldog out there, and I will always respect Casey Mize for that. This guy competes. He never gives up. Casey Mize, I respect the way that you pitch more than you can even know. There's a place for that. But for my game 2 starter, Casey Mize just does not miss enough bats for me. Whereas Jack Flaherty and Charlie Morton, they can miss some bats. We've seen Charlie Morton, even the bad version of him, where he's spraying the fastball, he's walking guys, giving up a hit. He's been able to escape or nearly escape 2 runners in scoring position, or the bases loaded, because he's able to miss bats and get strikeouts. Whereas Casey Mize just is not missing bats at that rate. So I think that's where I'm at. I would trust Jack Flaherty still the most at this point, but I don't really trust any of these guys. I'm worried about all of them. And again, I have a lot of respect for Casey Mize and what he's done in terms of being able to grind out outings. Like, you don't really see Casey Mize fold very often. We've seen Jack Flaherty fold. We've seen Charlie Morton fold. Those guys just, they can't bounce back. They can't respond from anything. Casey Mize, he does a pretty good job for the most part of finding a way to respond even in the face of adversity. So if I had to give Casey Mize a nod for anything, it would be that. But I don't know, man. We'll see what happens. It's just not looking great right now. All right, let's go into injury updates. Parker Meadows returns. Paul Sewald begins his rehab assignment. Jose Urquidy nears his return to the Tigers. And Reese Olson is throwing again. Parker Meadows is back from the injured list after recovering from a right quad strain. It seems like he's only going to play against right-handed pitchers. He's going to be in the 9 hole in the batting order until he proves himself. I know it's been a broken season because of the arm injury and the leg injury, but he's hitting 200 with a sub 600 OPS in 40 games. That's really disappointing. He's also worth -2 defensive runs saved in just less than 325 innings in center field. The narrative around Parker Meadows has been, if the Tigers can get the second half of 2024 Parker Meadows, then it's going to all be great. Because Parker Meadows can be that difference maker. And I know he's been injured, and I know it's been a broken season. With the high expectations we had for Parker Meadows coming into this season, are you a little bit disappointed, or do you just completely chalk it up to the injuries? And is there any hope that, hey, this guy can find that second half of 2024 and into the 2024 postseason version again and bring it with him into the end of September and into October? Because we know that this team is a different team with the good version of Parker Meadows.
Yeah, you have to be a little bit disappointed, right? He had the injury, and when he came back, he was playing for, several weeks in a row, and it just wasn't clicking for him. And to your point, like, the one that's really shocking is the negative defensive rating, right? Like, he didn't seem healthy out there. But then he comes back in his first game, and it looks like the Parker Meadows you remember. He gets a 2-run homer to tie the game. He makes a diving catch where he ranges 600 feet from right center to left center. He worked a walk later in that game. I think he walked again in his other game. So I'm still holding out hope there. You cross your fingers. He's a guy who could put up a lot of value for you very quickly if he starts hitting. It's just, it's tough to rely on him or think that he's going to hit for sure. But yeah, I know I'm chalking up most of it to the injury, other than that little stretch in the middle where he just wasn't playing well. But who knows? We'll see down these last 3 weeks. Maybe he'll put up some big numbers and you feel good about him going into the playoffs.
We also have right-handed reliever Paul Sewald coming back from a right shoulder strain. He has completed 2 games on his rehab assignment with High A West Michigan. 2 innings, 1 walk, 4 strikeouts. I'd expect him to advance to AAA Toledo soon. He is eligible to pitch for the Tigers in MLB on September 10th, but it'll likely be maybe a little bit after that. He could be a huge addition for the Tigers as a trade deadline acquisition. But let's not forget, Paul Sewald had a 4.31 ERA in 2024 and a 4.70 ERA in 2025. Before the shoulder injury. I need to see it to believe it, but with his swing and miss sweeper, he can earn my trust quickly. Jose Urquidy, right elbow surgery, coming back from that. He continues to pitch on his rehab assignment, pitching no more than 3 innings in an outing. He's going to pitch 1 more time with AAA Toledo. And then it sounds like the Tigers could activate him after that. I do not expect him to stretch out beyond 3 or 4 innings. That'll be the most for him. The Tigers are not going to bring Jose Urquidy back into a starting role. It's going to be 2 innings, 3 innings, maybe pushing it to 4 innings. And that's where he's going to be at as he makes his way back to the Tigers. He looked better in his most recent outing, but there have been some command concerns along the way, which isn't surprising coming back from Tommy John surgery. Another thing on Jose Urquidy, he hasn't pitched in the big leagues since 2023. So I could see this going really badly. Like, this could go really poor for the Tigers and for Jose Urquidy, but the Tigers are going to give it a try sooner rather than later. And then last, but certainly not least, is Reese Olson coming back from a right shoulder strain. He started playing catch off flat ground on Friday, so he is throwing again. The arm is moving. He is throwing a baseball. The Tigers, however, need to make a deep run in the postseason for him to return in 2025. What does a deep run mean? Does that mean ALCS? Does that mean World Series? Not sure. Because we don't know, I'm going to side with World Series is the deep run that would be necessary for Reese Olson to make his way back to the Tigers. And if he does return, it's not going to be as a full-time starter. His workload will be limited. Maybe that allows him to get back a little bit quicker. Maybe he can get back by the ALCS if he's not coming back as a full-time starter. But I still lean more on the side of the World Series at this point when you look at where he's at in the process and where we're at in the calendar. Again, it's September 8th, and this guy has just started to throw. He's still got to go through bullpens, live BPs, some type of simulated game if there aren't rehab assignments to be had because the minor leagues are over by that point. So we'll see on that. Maybe we see him in the ALCS if the Tigers get there. Or again, maybe a deep run is more like the World Series. I guess we'll find out if we get that far. But either way, it is good to see Reese Olson throwing. At the very least, hopefully this allows him to transition into a healthy offseason in preparation for 2026 spring training. The last thing we want here is a setback.
Yeah, to me, you got to strike while iron's hot, but at the same time, you have to think about the future a little bit. And this is your number 2 starter, basically this year going forward. Probably if he stays healthy. And if you do something to screw him up and he's out for next year too, you're really setting yourself back a lot. So, if the Tigers make the World Series and he comes back for a couple innings, that'd be spectacular, right? But I think they need to be really cautious here and make sure they don't push it and just make sure he's healthy for 2026.
All right, it is time to get out of here. Thanks to Chris Brown from Tigers Minor League Report for co-hosting with me this week. Thanks to everyone out there for listening to the latest episode of Days of Roar. Shout out to my wife, Savannah. We're celebrating our 2nd anniversary. Shout out to Savannah. Thank you for staying married to me, and thank you for being an amazing mother to Daxton. Please like, rate, share, and subscribe. Drop us a rating and comment what you think about the show. Stick with freep.com/sports for the latest Tigers coverage. I would like to thank the editor of the Free Press, Nicole Avery Nichols, sports editor Bill Bradley, and our magical producer, Robin Chan. For the Detroit Free Press, I'm Evan Petzold. We'll catch you next week. Until then, go in peace.